Welcome to this month's first Friday at Fusion Studio. My name is Rich Dione. I'm the co-director of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment here at Entertainment and Engineering here at Purdue University. Normally, I'm joined by my colleague Brandon Folk. Unfortunately, he is traveling, so I'm going to try to be twice as charming as I normally am, just to make up for his absence. Joining us today are Rick Boss and Preston Ward from Sky Elements Drones, and I'm positive that the fourth face on the screen is not Tori Weissman.
Got a surprise visitor with us today, Brian Geck, our creative director, and heads up our animation team.
Oh, wonderful!
He worked with quite a few of the students on this project.
Yeah, it's very rare to see him in the wild. Very rare.
Yes, him in the wild. So everybody should be glad to see Brian. We're glad to see him too.
Well, this is fantastic, Brian. Thanks for joining us. These folks from Sky Elements Drones and a number of other folks worked with a group of Purdue students last summer to create and deliver a drone performance as part of first year orientation in August. I think it was a 300 drone performance. It was about 13 minutes, something like that, in front of the 8,000 new students at Purdue, which was a wild experience. We're just going to talk a little bit about what that was like, and then open it up for questions from those of you who are attending. But first, if I could ask these folks to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about Sky Elements, we'll sort of go around with introductions first. Brian, will you just tell us who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brian Geck. I am the creative director for Sky Elements. So I lead the team of animators here, and I always like to say I bring everybody's visions to life. So I worked with, in this case, I worked with the students really closely to come up with the concepts, the designs, the story we were trying to tell, kind of led them through all of that process and brought the whole show together.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks, Brian. Preston, if you could introduce yourself next.
Sure. So my name is Preston Ward. I am the Chief Pilot and General Counsel of Sky Elements. I also head up our content team, so a lot of our social media stuff. I'm the guy behind that as well. So for the Purdue students, I help them understand the software, understand drone licensing, the regulations that went into it. And then we did some flight training when we were on site so the students could get some hands-on flying a drone show and launching it.
Awesome. Thank you. And Rick, I've saved you for last so you can introduce yourself and also just talk a little bit about Sky Elements.
Happy to. So Rick Boss, president of Sky Elements, and I just make sure and remove as many roadblocks as possible for Brian and Preston and the rest of the team so they can do some of this really cool stuff. I also lead our business development team just to make sure that we've got cool shows flying on a regular basis. So just a little bit about Sky Elements is that we're flying drone shows all over the United States. We even fly shows across the Caribbean. We travel quite a bit as well. So we've hit just about every state with a significant population. We've flown there. We've even flown in Hawaii, and we're trying to cover all the territories. We just did American Samoa. And for those that know, that's quite a travel to get to American Samoa. So, well, Alaska is actually the last place I think we need to hit to make sure we cover everywhere. But we're having a great time. The drone light show space is so new. It's so much fun, and it's just growing so quickly. So we're having a great time just sharing with folks what drone shows are, how they can impact their event, and the Purdue opportunity here to communicate with students and others to share what's happening in the drone light show space, how engineering, art, all of it is coming together in a really exciting way. It's been a great experience for our team, and we've loved this partnership and look forward to continuing it.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Probably best to start. I said a little bit about what the event was at Purdue, but just to give a little bit bigger picture, if you could talk to us about what that collaboration between your team and the students at Purdue looked like, and what roles students play, and how they contributed to the success of the event. And I'll let whichever one of you thinks you're most prepared to talk about that tackle it.
Preston topic. He's been
so I'll tackle that one. So we really wanted to show the students every aspect of what went into to make a drone show happen. So what we've initially did is we broke it up into different segments that make up a drone show. So we had the group that was learning about the software of flying it. Then we also had a group with Brian learning about the animation and actually creating the show. And we also had a group with our content team, because what we've learned in the flying all these shows is an important piece of a drone show is capturing the moments. And being able to show people what happened. And that's almost more important than what happened the day of, because on the internet, it lives forever. And you have that lasting impact that only 8 people saw it. But we did a reel that night we had Purdue-Pete there, and over 150,000 people saw that reel. So it's much more of a reaching entertainment than you would first think. And it was just fantastic to interact with the students and see them come up with the idea for the show with Brian's team, execute the show with my team, and then they all were there capturing the show and making sure that we got that content so that we could put it out on the internet and really make it a lasting impact with it lives on.
So you had students in, it sounds like a variety of areas. And I should say, for those who aren't from Purdue, Purdue-Pete is our unofficial mascot. Purdue's mascot is indeed a train. That's a little harder to get to walk around. There's a Boilermaker Pete who showed up for our event. And you all worked together with students starting in around April or May of last year. Is that right?
Yep. We started very early. We tried to, show them parts of the things that we were actually doing, some of the shows that we were creating at the time, and giving them a little behind the scenes so that they could then use that information to help build the show that we were flying for Purdue.
Sure. And as I recall, I think I read somewhere that the students who were working on understanding the piloting of the drones, were they working towards some kind of a drone piloting license? Did I read that correctly?
Yep. So I gave them all the information that they would need to go past the 107 test. One of the things that I assigned to them is actually a training prep course on learning how to get your 107. It's the same one I took to get my initial drone license. So, I encourage them, to anybody that wanted to get that drone license, to go take that test. And you never know where drone shows are going to take you, or even the drone industry, right? Like when I first got that drone license in 2017, drone shows weren't even a thing. And now I've flown 600 or 700 shows myself. And it's just, I've been at all kinds of places that I never would have imagined. And the drone space is changing so rapidly, and it's such an expanding place that, it's really something that you can get in and you can go amazing places.
Sure. That's fantastic. So we had students working on the creative development process, students working on the piloting and the drone technology piece, and students working on the marketing, both sort of before and after. I want to talk a little bit about the creative development process. And Brian, I'm glad you're here. If you could talk first about what it's like to create a drone performance in general, and then I would love to hear about what was different about working with a group of students to try to make that happen.
Yeah, sure. So in general, kind of our process, we'll talk with the client, see what they want. Just about every show we do is completely custom, because we can make anything you can dream up in the sky. So usually we'll meet with a client, kind of work out what they want to see. My team develops storyboards. We go back and forth with storyboards, and then we create sample images. We call those mock-ups. Of what those formations, those different things are going to look like. We work on those, go through several rounds, and then we do the actual animation, and we produce a video that shows what it's really going to look like in the sky. And then we go out and we fly it. So with this one, though, normally we just take on all the work because we're hired to do that. But I wanted to really teach and engage the students in the process. So it was a lot of education about what can a drone show actually do? What can you do? So we have a certain number of dots in the sky, and they can only move so fast. And so we kind of worked through a story, kind of talked them through, and then we worked out just a general concept, and I put that on them. So every time we would meet, I'd give them a little homework assignment, like take the next step. Okay, let's make a story. So we decided we wanted to tell a story. And so then they kind of worked through the story, and then we took it step by step, frame by frame. We can generally target 10 to 12 different formations or moments of the show. And so, they first come back with 15 or 18, and so we have to whittle it down. And then I worked with them So we had one particularly talented student who could draw, was very artistic. And so I tasked her with actually drawing the images as once we got to that stage. And so all of the formations that you see in the sky are actually her drawings. So she drew them in Adobe Illustrator, and then I handed them over to my animators, and then they put them into drone form. So we really worked with the students a little bit more to get them to actually do all of the work. And I was so impressed with the quality and the depth of work that this group of students put in. Every time I was always excited to meet with them because it just blew me away how much work and effort they were really putting into it. They really cared about it, and I think it shows in the show that we produced. Really meant a lot to the students and got a really good reaction.
That's
so
great.
No one had any 3D animation experience, and it honestly, I hire people who have been around 3D animation for decades, and it takes them several months to learn how to do exactly what we do. So we kind of handled all the later part, but I had the students completely involved in coming. It was all their idea for the design, the story, the flow, everything that the show turned out to look like.
Gotcha. Just to clarify, when you say the 3D part or the later part, that's the transition to get the drones from this image to the next image.
Right. So
Yeah.
actually plotting the path. So we plot the path of every single drone from the time it takes off to the time it lands. We make sure there's no collisions. We make sure a drone's not flying 100 miles an hour. So we take care of all of that. We put it all together. So that's what I meant by that.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Collaborating with students it can be fantastic. It can be challenging. It can be lots of different things. I'm curious. I have found working with students that they often ask me things that I have never thought of, right? And they lead me in directions that I might not have anticipated. They often ask me questions I don't know the answers to, and I have to say I have to find that out, and I'll come back to you. Were there any particularly sort of unexpected contributions or innovative ideas, things that they brought from a place of being naive about the technology and about the process that made you go, "Oh, we would never thought about that"? And this is for any of you.
Yeah, I'll start off from a design perspective. I told them to really challenge my animators, and they did. So they came up with a very fluid story that just consistently flowed from one to another to another. So there wasn't really very much opportunity just to say, hey, we're going to do this image transition and this image. And so they really dove in with some challenging creative problems for us to solve, and we were able to solve some, and some we had to kind of roll back and think, well, how can we actually accomplish this?
Sure.
But yeah, they definitely pushed the boundaries.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and from the start, I told the students, I'm like, there's no bad ideas. If there's anything you can think of, with drone shows, there's always chance for viral moments. There's always those unexpected, crazy things that people don't think of. And that reel we did with Pete, I think we had the idea 15 minutes before the show started. One of the students suggested it, and I was just like, let's do it. Let's go. So just, coming up with, I told them, any idea you can think of, let's talk about it. Let's see what we can make happen. And that one just turned out to be great and fantastic. And it just really popped. And it just was something that they came up with that we were able to execute on such a quick turn that it was great.
Sure. Were there questions that they asked about in terms of the flight technologies that were maybe gave you ideas or thoughts about new things, or is it so straightforward that this is how you fly it and this is the thing? I wasn't part of that. I didn't see much of that, so.
A drone show, the drones we use are very straightforward. So, it was more of them trying to understand and ask questions about the actual positioning and how that works and how do we keep them in place. And then, it's always surprising to everybody that we don't have any actual collision avoidance. It is just all GPS and precision GPS and Brian's team making that animation where they don't run into each other. So they were really interested in how that piece worked, and that was their main focus.
The lack of collision avoidance pieces certainly blew my mind the first time I heard about that from you all, which I guess puts a lot of pressure on the animation team, right? Like, you're making sure that nothing crashes.
Yes, we have invested so much time and effort and resources. We have at this point now, a series of algorithms, and our own software that we've built that handles all of that. So that way our transitions are as fast as possible. So we have the most efficient formation transitions as we can. And then also with the collision avoidance, and even speed ramping, because like I said, a drone can't go 0 to 100 instantly. You have to speed ramp it. So there's all these layers that kind of go into it. And so I've got a team of very talented programmers that have dedicated their lives to thinking how drones think.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to ask a question I didn't send to y'all to begin with. I hope that's okay.
All right.
Spoiler alert: we prepped these questions in advance, but something that I was a sound designer for a long time before I sort of got stuck in just doing scenery construction and management kinds of things. And there are some best practices that you kind of learn along the way, right? Like, this is how you ramp up a cue. This is how you introduce a cue partway through a scene. They're just techniques that are very technical about how sound functions in a live event. And I was struck watching the performance, and this was the first and to date only drone performance I've ever seen. So I only have the one, but there were moments that I was watching and going, oh, you have to remember that they only move so fast, or, oh, you have to remember that you can't just turn the lights off and turn them back on and they're in a different position in a new thing. Is the drone performance space so new that you all are discovering those things as you go, or is there some sort of established practices that you as animators know, like, if we're going to go from this to this, we do these things? Do you see what I'm saying? Is that a clear question? It's probably not, but.
No, I think I understand what you're saying, Rich. And to answer the question, we're having to pave the way on a lot of that stuff. There's really no standard practices or anything like that. When we first got going, there was maybe a couple hundred drone shows ever when we first started doing shows. So it was still very unique. We were the 4th company in the United States to even get the license to be able to do a drone show.
Wow.
So all of this stuff is new, and we're still learning a lot on the way. The technology is still so new, and it's, in some circumstances, fragile, right? Like, even the Purdue show, when we first started that show, on the screen, it told me that half the drones weren't synced up with the time. And I knew most likely it probably was just an error, that it wasn't reporting correct. But just to play it safe, we did a reset so that we didn't have any issues. And it's just little quirky things like that we're working through to really build this technology to be better and push it forward. But on the design front, Brian's team, I mean, they are at the forefront of all kinds of unique advancements. They're winning international show design awards and doing things that people have never seen before. And we really try to push the boundaries of what we can do and just really show people drone shows in a different way, right? We did a Halloween drone show. It was at my house, but the whole premise of the video was to have it said full-size candy bars with an arrow. And the whole point of that was just to show, with the drone show, if you put a sign in the air that says "come here," the people will come. It'll draw people in. It'll be something that people will want to go see. So we really try to make it unique and put a different spin on it that people haven't seen before.
Sure. Thank you for that. That's great. We talked a little bit about some of the interesting perspectives that students can bring, and something that I tell my students when we talk about internships and things. There's a piece of guidance that the IRS gives out to companies about internships, right? And what actually qualifies as an intern. And one of the 10 check boxes is interns are there to learn, so they will fundamentally make the job of getting the work done harder, right? If they're hindering you in completing it, that's probably an internship. And so I think it's a good way to think about working with students in these sort of collaborative, experiential opportunities is that it doesn't just mean you have more labor, you have actually more challenges. And so I wonder if there were some specific challenges or lessons learned about collaborating with students that you all gleaned from this that might be useful for either other institutions or other companies that are thinking about these kinds of partnerships.
Yeah, I think on my end, the one thing that I learned that I think would have been much better in the way we structured it is getting them more hands-on experience sooner, right? Especially with the piloting piece, especially with the drones. Looking at a screen, seeing software, seeing pictures can only get you so far. And it's just a totally different experience when you have the physical drones in front of you. And even flying 6 drones is better than flying no drones. So, that's one piece that I think, moving forward, I'd try to work in sooner rather than all the buildup for months and months and months, and then have one thing at the end for the hands-on piece. I'd want more hands-on along the way.
Sure. Brian, anything that you can think of that you learned along the way that you might want to do differently or encourage other folks to think about?
Yeah, so we definitely put in a lot more than just kind of our regular process. I met with them a lot more to kind of go over every little step of the way. So my group of students was pretty good. They really listened and applied everything that I said every single time. So it was a little bit slower. It was of a process, but letting them kind of work through it worked out really well. And I kind of agree with Preston. Maybe it might be good to bring a little more hands-on. I did some demos of kind of behind the scenes, showing them our 3D programs and how the shows actually animate. And so that's a pretty steep learning curve on those software platforms. But maybe if there was a way to be able to integrate that a little bit more.
Sure. Sort of a follow-up question to that. Because it sounds like you put in, and it doesn't just sound like, I've observed that you all put in a lot of extra time. What makes something like this worthwhile? What made you all decide you wanted to try to do this partnership, and what made it worthwhile for you all?
Well, I think for me particularly, I love seeing people learn new things, and I love being able to show somebody something that they've never seen before and really create. And the students were so eager and so fun to be around. And it was just a great process that anytime we get an email from a STEM program where kids are interested in drones, I've done 2 talks at elementary schools to drone programs, just because I think that encouraging that generation to really look at these new technologies and really build towards those kind of careers can just take people so far. And it's just such a new space and a fun space that the more exposure we can get people to it, I think that the more that the space will grow and just keep pushing forward.
Sure. Great. That's a great answer. A follow-up question, again, that I don't think we had talked about before. As I imagine that part of this interaction is also just getting interest in students to lead to a pipeline of potential employees in the future, right? Like if you get to them early enough, they're going to start learning the things that you need them to learn, and then they're going to be better employees when you hire them, right? That's why most companies certainly want to engage in these kinds of interactions. What are some things that students or early career folks in this field that you've seen could stand to learn while they're in school that they're maybe not getting right now? What are some ways to help get them further along the path to being able to be star employees with you all?
Yeah, I think Brian, that's a good one for you.
Yeah, so definitely learning. For me, learning 3D applications. So that's typically kind of reserved in the art space. And so I'm usually hiring artists that are 3D artists that have gone through school programs to learn all of those. Usually what I find is whatever school program just focuses on one platform, but knowing multiple platforms, because there's a lot out there, knowing multiple platforms and being able to be diverse in that aspect is actually really helpful, because what we've learned is that every platform has its strengths and weaknesses. And so our process that we actually wound up developing kind of utilizes strengths and weaknesses from different ones. And so if I bring in somebody and they only know one platform, I'm going to train them on these other platforms because they're going to have to know them. So being versatile, being able to pick up programs quickly is really important.
Something that when I teach CAD programs, well, I don't teach CAD programs. That's kind of the point. I teach drafting, and the approach I try to take is, let's think about drafting in a computer environment and then talk about how that's implemented in different programs. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like, you're really more interested in 3D animators who can be sort of software agnostic as opposed to stuck in one program.
Right. You have to have that base foundation of just knowing the general principles of animation, but being platform agnostic is really helpful.
Sure, that's great. I'm going to ask a big question, and then I think there'll be some follow-ups. And I see some Q&A showing up in the chat here. But so you guys, your company lives at this really exciting intersection of technology and art, right? Like, you can't paint the pictures in the sky without the drones. That's the bottom line. How do you balance pushing the boundaries of what they can do and creating visually stunning and resonant experiences, right? Like, I have to imagine that as an animator, there are times, Brian, where you're like, I wish we could do this, but we can't. But I want to make it do this. How do you navigate that knife edge? And that's probably for both of you, Brian and Preston, because you're also trying to make the drones do things but have to come back to Brian sometimes and say, I can't, right? So I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah. So the answer is testing. And sometimes the secondary part of that is sometimes we crash drones in those.
Yeah, that's the wall.
Yeah, that's the wall. So we go and we test and we fly. And so occasionally I'll say to my animators, hey, we're gonna have a test day. What do you want to do? What do you want to see? What do you think you could do? And that's one, testing to see what it looks like in the sky, what the audience would actually see. Does this really come through? We're constantly playing with depth and perspective and things like that. So letting the artists play in that aspect is great. We'll test speeds, we'll test distances. So through a lot of testing and trial and error, we learn from what we test, and then we go back and we refine our algorithms, and then we guide and teach the artists on how to, again, think like a drone and kind of make smoother motions. And maybe we can do this specific type of motion a certain speed, but if you add a twist to it, that's going to really have to slow down because the drones can't handle it. So really the answer is a lot of testing and trial and error.
Yeah, and technological improvements, right? Like, I try to stay at the forefront of anything that we can get, either a better drone or better GPSs. That's what we recently switched to. We upgraded all our GPSs. And when you did that, we could also make the drones go faster now because they can maintain that GPS lock while they're moving quicker. But me and Brian, we work together on a lot of things. Like, we'll have clients come in that'll want something like that. If you've seen we did a countdown in the sky for an hour. And that was an idea a client wanted. And, I thought through, okay, well, how can I make the software actually launch the shows and make this happen? And then Brian had to figure out, one, how to make all those points of a countdown animate, but also make other drones come in and the switch seamless, because our drones can't fly for an hour, but we did this seamless hour-long countdown. So we really put our heads together to figure out how to make it possible with the technology, possible to happen on the animation end, and then merge it all together. So we do a lot of that. We're trying to solve problems and really do things that people haven't seen before, especially when we get a crazy request from somebody. We're like, how do we actually make that happen? And then we, more often than not, can figure it out.
Sure. That's a really fascinating problem right there. The battery life challenge, right? Like, how do you make something go longer than 12 minutes when they only live for 12 minutes, right? Robin, you've got a question in the question and answer that I'll get to in a minute, but it's kind of a follow-up that I want to ask to the sort of the tension between the technology and the design piece. And it's I will confess, it is a purely selfish question because of the institution that I'm at Purdue, which has students studying everything from animation to computer programming to aviation technology to aeronautical engineering, right? And including designing the next generation of drones or figuring out what the next fastest GPS system looks like. What are some of the technological questions or challenges or things that you wish there were a solution to, right? Or even if there was just one, like if we just could get the drones to do this, like what would that be?
I think I see Rick grinning, and I think I know where he's going. And the answer is taking off and landing in boxes, where instead of having to set each drone out individually, and then measure out in between them, we just lay a box of them out. They take off, they go back in the box, you pack it up, and you put it in the truck. And those solutions are slowly starting to come out and get developed, but it's just not quite there yet from the one manufacturer that makes it, their drone just performance-wise doesn't do as well as ours. And I think Rick's going to chime in with his thoughts too.
I'll chime in with that too. That's definitely helping production. The other thing is just consistency with drones. One of the issues is when you're flying 1 or 2 or 3 drones individually, piloting them, etc. Though having those take off and ensure they perform well is pretty easy, like for cinematographers, etc. But when you're pushing out 1,000 drones at a time, ensuring that all of those drones are consistent in their performance, that they take off every time, and being able to do it in a way that's efficient and cost effective. So a lot of that is an engineering solution. A lot of that is software engineering solutions to understand when a drone has an issue and that it needs to be repaired, things of that nature. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what we're able to help and what we're able to see in the industry to push that forward, to find that consistency and basically a low-cost robot that can self-diagnose and make it easier on a production team to swap those out or make generalized repairs.
Those are both really. I laughed at the coming out of the box, but only because I've worked a lot of in and out calls for shows, and that's the worst part is the load in, the load out. Yep. But that's a genuinely challenging problem to try to reconcile. And then Rick, the other parts that you were talking about as well. And part of what's fascinating to me about that is Purdue. Shameless plug for my institution. Purdue is an institution that seems really well positioned to look at all of these questions, right? Like, how do we do the animation throughput better? And how do we deal with the software in the back end? Because we've got students studying all these areas. So I share that just to say I'm as excited about continuing this partnership with you all as it seems like you all are. There's some great questions here in the Q&A. We'll do Robin's here first. I'm going to go right to the last part of this because there's a lot of text here, and I want to be mindful of time. We tried to talk about this a little bit earlier, but I'm wondering if you all could identify 1 or 2 really specific hurdles that students experienced, and then maybe talk about how you coached them through it. And probably this is a question for Brian, because I imagine that came up mostly in the animation process. Is there 1 or 2 specific things that you remember where you were like, I got to figure out how to help them understand this?
So I think one of the biggest hurdles that we kind of had to go over was understanding the level of detail that you get with drones. So we had 300 dots. And so when you're trying to create the Boilermaker Express with 3 people in it, and then another train car with more people, and then they get out, like, you really have to simplify down and think about, well, simple things like if you're displaying a person, do you display their face? Because maybe you only have 4 or 5 drones to create eyes and a mouth, because that's all that will physically fit in that space. Maybe a certain formation, if we're making a tower, we're only allowed to fly to 400 feet. And so in the sky, our drones are usually about 6 feet apart. So you get a limited amount of vertical height that you can design to. So thinking through the physical design constraints of the drones is something that's really difficult to grasp. And so it took a couple iterations, and then as well as the time. So understanding how long it takes for drones to get from A to B. If I am doing a transition, I know generally I'm going to need 10 to 18 seconds, but I won't know for sure. So if I'm planning out a show and I think it's going to be a little too long, I've only got a certain amount of battery life. So you have to start making those hard decisions. What do I cut? And still have the story make sense.
So many bits to that, right? I'm thinking back to the very first thing you were talking about in terms of resolution. And I'm assuming that the students, and probably even you, start with line art, right, for your animations. And then at some point you have to progress to, now it's only 300 dots or 800 dots or 1,000 dots. And it sounds like there's knowledge about animation involved there, but also really thinking carefully about things like iconography and symbology, and like what kinds of things help represent a particular thought or an image. Like you say, do you need a whole face to tell to say it's a person? Do you need fingers and toes to say it's a person? Right? Fascinating. Preston, did anything specific come up? Again, you were just showing them how to do the thing.
Yeah, not that I can think of.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's another really interesting question that came up. I imagine I'm going to see questions like this all the time in the future. Has or will AI been used in the design of drone shows to try and resolve some of the design challenges that you were just talking about, Brian?
So short answer, long answer. Short answer, yes, we are experimenting with it. Long answer is kind of the same thing with all this AI technology, is it really takes an actual person sitting there putting the inputs and working on it. So we do use a little bit of AI here and there to come up with designs. It cannot, as of right now, come up with anything really useful for us, other than just maybe some simple line artwork. But it really takes an actual intelligent person sitting there thinking in 3D space and working through these design issues. A great example is if I do a horse running, parts of the body are going to stretch and squish. There's 3D depth I have to consider. One of the things we do is when a drone's light is off, you don't see it in the sky, so it's invisible. So a lot of times we animate the colors where, let's say, the leg is moving and then it moves behind the other leg. The back leg is going to go dark for a second to give it that perspective to look like it is actually going behind it and it doesn't get visually messy in the sky. AI can't really work through all that stuff yet, but we've experimented with some fun stuff. We recently did a very, very artistic piece for an art festival, and we used AI to come up with some pretty interesting designs. But ultimately, it comes down to an actual artist working through all of the design issues.
Interesting. Preston, it looks like you're going for your mic. Were you going to add something?
Yeah, I would love AI to be more, though. I would love to just show up to a site and not have anything planned out and just be like, AI, figure out where these go. I'm going to punch in. I want this. I want a Christmas tree. I want a Santa Claus. And then it just does it. That would be amazing if that happens, but it's not there yet, but I'd love it to be there.
Well, I wanted to sort of follow up a little bit and ask, particularly around some of the challenges, Rick, that you were talking about, that are sort of still in your future. Do you see a space, or are there people playing in a space related to machine learning algorithms for like diagnosing drone issues or self-diagnosis, or even the question of setting themselves up, right? Like, are there people who are exploring that? Is that an opportunity space that you see?
Yeah, it is. And we just actually have a meeting that we have next week, and we're talking to some folks, and it's coming actually from a bigger space that's happening. And drone light show space is so small. And I often say that ours is just a novel application of technology that's there, and we're writing on technology that's being pushed forward in all areas, batteries, GPS, et cetera. It's being pushed forward for other projects, not necessarily drone shows, but we're working through that. But swarm technology for drone deliveries and military applications, a lot of those projects are bearing some fruit to help us solve some of these issues, what they might call a self-repair for a swarm. In other words, if you've got deliveries going out to Amazon, they're working on that the drone knows it's a problem, and it grabs another drone, pulls it in there. A pilot doesn't have to think about it, things of that nature. So yeah, we're leaning into those projects, learning how they can be applicable to us, and see what we can help leverage into the space to make that, what I call the production side of it, that much smoother, that much more consistent, so the audience sees a consistent result. And then also what it does is it helps us make it more efficient across the board. AI, all these tools, and Brian's team, that they can drive more efficiency in it, in the production side, that we can drive more efficiency. And that allows us to bring an experience to an audience at a price point that maybe a city can afford. Right now, it's relatively expensive. But as we get more efficient, as we get these tools, we'll be able to bring it to more audiences around the country. And that's what we love to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. So we've gone through my questions, and I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. If you all have any more, if you're watching, throw them up there. But this is an opportunity, I guess. Is there anything that you all want to share about this experience that we haven't talked about, right? Like about your time with the Purdue students and working with Purdue?
Maybe one thing I just share this, I think that this program in general is going down this direction here, is where it's helping folks understand holistically what's happening. Technology, design, production, how does it all come together? And so I always encourage students to look at things as holistically as they can, as they're learning design and the art side of things, and understand how does all of this come together. Same on the technology side. If you're, love building drones and you love figuring out the technology of side, keep figuring out ways through Purdue and other ways that you can kind of step back and see, how does this fit into the entire ecosystem of what's happening in industry, in the arts. And that will help give you a great perspective to solve more problems. At the end of the day, we're looking for, as employers and other employers, is they're looking for folks that not only can do the job, that can figure out how to design things, but that they have a perspective that they can bring more advances, make it more efficient. So I just encourage everyone just to continue to explore all those opportunities you have to open up your world of experiences, and it'll be invaluable to your future.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. Brian or Preston, anything to add?
Don't feel I think Rick hit the nail on the head.
Fair enough.
I think it's really unique getting to work. We had a rather diverse group with us. So they were in different majors. So I didn't have just a bunch of art majors. And thinking through and learning and experiencing kind of the cross applications, that's where the magic really starts to happen.
Yeah, that's very true. As both of you were talking, I was reminded. So I teach a structural design class, structural analysis class for the stage. And one of the things I tell students all the time is there's going to be a point where someone's going to ask you to figure out how to support a chair that has to spin 3 feet off the ground with no visible supports, and people will be able to crawl underneath it and over at the top of it. It has happened, right? Like I have had to do that, solve that. And sometimes that comes from not knowing the technology, right? The designers come up with a really great idea, but they don't understand how to make it work. And similarly, I have certainly walked into projects often with early career professionals where a technician has put supports in places that just make the whole thing look ugly, right? And you go, you could have just put it there and it would have looked great. And that again comes from the technologist not knowing the aesthetics, right? And not understanding why that's important. So I think again, the idea that it's important to get out of our silo and see across the board makes us better at, even if we just live in that silo, it makes us better at it. So awesome. Gentlemen, this was fantastic. I appreciate you taking the time. And folks who were watching, we appreciate you sharing your time with us. We're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'll let you know that we've got one more First Friday this semester. It's coming at the beginning of December, where we'll be joined by Eric Sampson, who's a professor of philosophy and ethics here at Purdue, who is working on the ethics of artificial intelligence. And Erica Bondarov Rapak, I hope I've said her last name right. I didn't confirm it before today. I apologize. Who is an artist and an entrepreneur who has been researching the use of AI in the live entertainment industry. We're going to have a conversation with the two of them about artificial intelligence and entertainment and things that are happening, could be happening, and maybe things that we should be thinking about whether it should happen or not. So join us for that. And thank you all for being here. We'll see y'all later.
Thanks, everybody.